Hi, my name is Joshua Montano, and today I'm going to speak to the role of intentional dialogue in promoting the effectiveness of DEI at the workplace and beyond. And when I speak about dialogue, I want you to push aside the image of grabbing your nearest neighbor and arguing to try and change perspective through debate. I will instead ask you to consider the dialogue that you have with your supervisors, coworkers, and even institutions, and why you should be demanding more from all three. In a political climate that casts more and more doubt on DEI and its effectiveness, I will argue in this TED Talk that DEI should have a more active, intentional approach, one that is more involved than a DEI facilitator speaking to a quiet classroom or a new hire clicking through a mandated online workshop. First, let's talk about the overall aim of DEI. I agree with Daniel Opong here. DEI should set a safe environment for all workers to feel safe and encouraged to thrive. However, the solution isn't exactly a simple fix. One study of DEI at different workplaces finds that minoritized employees are best empowered by what's called positive organizational contexts. One of these contexts would be psychological safety, an approach to support, not to demean, those who speak up and contribute at the workplace. I've had the privilege of experiencing positive organizational contexts throughout my whole research journey. At BioNTech, I started my focus in cancer immunotherapy, where a manager took a chance on me, a sophomore with not a lot of lab experience, but interesting, curious questions about different research approaches. Then, I continued my summer undergraduate research experience under the Amgen Scholars Program, which exposed me to a brilliant and amazing diverse group of scientists. And finally, I was able to apply my growing knowledge within science in Genentech, partnered with the National GEM Consortium, which offered me a PhD fellowship and also allowed me to apply my knowledge within an industry. I'll show you how psychological safety is important because it shows that employees can have successive confidence at the workplace. First, we have learner safety, where the employee must feel included, and then they must feel that they have the ability to ask questions and learn. Then we have the most essential part of the workplace, an employee who can speak up and contribute to the workplace. And finally, an employee who can challenge, be challenged, or maybe even challenge the status quo. To reach this level, workplaces must go beyond thinking that diversity and psychological safety goes hand in hand. One size does not fit all. So how can leaders orient their leadership towards inclusive spaces that create psychological safety? Today, I'll detail my positive experiences throughout my summer internships and detail how each of these leaders use situational leadership to create inclusive spaces and psychological safety. At BioNTech, I felt included because my manager directed a lot of brilliant teachers, brilliant scientists, and amazing team leaders to help feel included and have conversations. But these amazing scientists initiate these conversations to begin with. It wasn't my manager who directed inclusivity, it was the workplace culture that created it. And then I was able to continue my expertise in research as I was able to learn and have confidence within research. A PI and graduate student were essential in allowing me to make mistakes within my understanding, but giving me feedback to learn in turn. And finally, these teaching moments allowed me to have a sort of supported handoff that allowed me to have my own independent research project through the Amgen Scholars Program. These were essential teaching moments that allowed me to grow confidence and allowed me to ask and answer my own questions within research. And finally, at Genentech, I reached into challenger safety as I was delegated tasks and given the ability to build up my own independent research project from the ground up. In each meeting, my manager would internalize my perspective, clarify it for better understanding, and build on it for a more effective solution. When in one meeting, she said, "You should stop saying we did this research, say that you did it, you did it." It didn't feel like a threat, it felt like empowerment. Overall, this is what functional inclusivity looked at each of these workplaces. These bits of communication, both verbal and nonverbal, challenged my perspective, but also encouraged me to go further within research. Now I'm able to ask and answer my own questions within my PhD. Before, I didn't have that confidence at all. Studies do show that leadership styles have different effects on positive team climate and psychological safety. As we see here, consultative and supportive leadership are correlated with a positive team climate, which is best correlated with psychological safety. We would be remiss to not talk about these other leadership styles, authoritative and challenging leaders who want to challenge their workers at every turn. Although well-intentioned, these leaders can cause overall anxiety at the workplace and avoidant behavior that seeks to reduce the amount of confrontations and conflict to one's identity or perspective. I spent a semester in a work context just like this. Each meeting demonstrated a need to perform because you knew that each slide would be questioned and challenged. A first-year undergraduate was expected to know every statistical analysis that went into the lab. And as I came home and carpooled with this brilliant group of scientists who were just happy to be home before 10 p.m., I genuinely asked them, do y'all think this isn't correct, right? And one of them finally spoke up after a bit of silence and said, yeah, we just don't talk about it. And this is the part that I really want to focus in on. Because no one talked about it, this leadership style became normalized. Of course, managers should push their employees to challenge them and develop them into great scientists. But a perceptive manager should understand the effect of how they lead, and also the effect of how they communicate. These questions are well-intentioned to help develop their employees. However, these bits of communication can serve to denigrate and serve as a threat to one's identity or perspective. Looking at this communication model, we can see how the intended effect of a message changes as the speaker encodes and as a receiver decodes that same message. For someone who is new to STEM or the workplace, constant criticism amounts to be a personal threat, saying that they don't belong or that their identity or perspective isn't valued. When looking at racial microaggressions, the essential part of understanding how the intended effect and the real-life consequence is key to understanding how racial microaggressions look and feel like at the workplace. The feeling of microaggression can only be fully understood by someone who has actually experienced one, but can be partially empathized through an intentional dialogue that must be drawn out of underrepresented people. Limited by lived experience and sometimes close perspective, racial dialogue could look a lot like this. One that seems to have a whole separate basis of lived reality and facts, and the other one seeming not to understand or care. This feels like a fool's errand to try to use debate to try to shift perspective, but dialogue does serve as a valuable tool to communicate a reality that is clear and apparent to many people who experience racism in the world. However, we must empower these voices to start with. Monologic DEI classrooms sanitize discussion because they tend to have a one-way discussion from teacher to student, and thus take out the dialogic portion that students can communicate their own lived reality to. In a dialogic approach, students can bring their lived reality to the table and have a more mature, intelligent racial discussion. Without diverse voices in the room, feedback and dialogue is excluded, and therefore the monologic classroom essentially becomes a safe space for those who can only imagine racism in the abstract. Without an intentional agenda from institutions to center the dialogue from people with diverse realities and diverse perspectives of view, the monologic classroom essentially becomes ineffective in actually understanding how racism impacts communities. This dissonance between the reality and the abstract is what Justice Ketanji Brown means when she says, quote, deeming race irrelevant in law doesn't make it so in real life. The law can flippantly declare race equality, but that doesn't reflect the tools that universities use now to reflect the material conditions that persist in the United States as a result of systemic inequalities. There are genuine material consequences to gentrification and over-policing that affects Black communities and people of color. These are the diverse voices that we must center within our dialogue. As we turn towards a dialogic classroom, we must think about centering these diverse perspectives in order to have a more better informed dialogue. And this includes institutional support to center, promote, and support diverse voices. As we call in these diverse perspectives, we must ask, is calling in, quote, worth it? For one, For one, a lot of racial frustration and dialogue comes from minoritized employees realizing that it's not worth asking people to consider their material and lived realities. However, if we are to have a dialogic classroom, we should consider and prioritize those with diverse perspectives first, not just have a narrative that is only dominated by political dialogue. Thank you.